boy, Matt Riviera, who is also known as an Arkansas state representative, Matt Duffield. I think you're the highest ranking uh, political wrestler right now, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, first, Hannibal, thank you so much for having me on. I've been a fan of your channel for a long time. And I told some of my colleagues in the world of politics, I said, it's so interesting. When I was in the wrestling business, I was in the business over 20 years. One of my goals was to be asked to come on your show as a wrestler. I just thought that would be really cool to have the relevance to be asked to come on. I think it's so interesting how things worked out. And now here I am out of wrestling and I'm now a politician and I was asked to be on Hannibal TV. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you were asked based on being a politician because recently you gave a award to Tommy Morrison, and I've been involved somewhat in the shooting of the I Am Tommy Morrison movie, but you gave an award to his son Kenzie Morrison at the state capitol of Arkansas that they ended up filming for the movie. I didn't end up coming out for it, but did you want to just talk about that quickly? About
Yeah,
that
sure.
award?
So I'll kind of explain. So, the state of Arkansas is really interesting. We have a lot of really interesting people and successful people that have been from here. And so Tommy Morrison was one of those people that I thought it was appropriate to honor him. He's from a little town called Gravett, Arkansas, and so I just had the inclination to do it. And I looked him up, and I saw that he had a son named Kenzie Morrison who's followed in his footsteps as a boxer, and he's been very successful so far. So I contacted Kenzie, got his blessing. We put it together. I went down and honored the successes of Tommy Morrison. He had a great boxing career, as you know, and of course, he's known for being in one of the Rocky movies as well.
Yeah, Rocky Five, and he did beat George Foreman, and it's amazing he was only 19 when he was in the Rocky movie.
I did not know he was only,
Yeah,
and he certainly looked. And Hannibal, I know you definitely still go to the gym and keep yourself in shape and everything post wrestling. It kind of becomes a habit to us. But I told Kenzie, I said, man, your dad, Tommy Morrison, when he was in his peak physique, I mean, that to me he had like the ultimate physique that fitness enthusiasts and wrestlers and all of us aspire to be. He had that physique that told guys, don't mess with me, I'll whoop your ass. And he had that physique that said that all the women, wanted to kind of like, I've got my shirt today. I've got my Rick Rude t-shirt on today. It was a similar thing to that with Tommy Morrison.
yeah, simply ravishing. Hey, speaking
Yeah.
of Arkansas and politics, did you happen to catch the Billy Jack Haynes dark side of the ring? Because I know he's tried to implicate himself over the years on the famous Boys on the Tracks murder. Maybe you could share some inside information on that.
Well, it's interesting you ask. So I do still watch the Dark Side of the Ring. I've not seen the Billy Jack Haynes episode yet. I did recently watch the Eddie Gilbert, and the one that was really interesting to me was the Ludwig Borga episode because he ended up being elected to political office, and man, that was an interesting one. But no, I haven't seen the Billy Jack Haynes. But when he came to Arkansas and claimed to be a part of the Boys on the Tracks, I mean, Hannibal, I can't overstate the media attention that he got when he came here. I mean, pro wrestling is very much. We didn't have a full-time territory here. Mid-South Wrestling was predominantly the promotion in the state that they were known. But so when Billy Jack came, most sports enthusiasts, even if they're not wrestling fans, know who he was. So when he came to town, he received a lot of publicity. Now, in regards to what he said on the Boys on the Tracks, and that's a topic that I studied. So my degree in college was broadcast journalism, and I fancy myself an independent journalist on things. So Arkansas, we've had some really interesting history here of things who have happened or may have happened. And when Billy Jack came and made some of those claims, to be honest, we'll never know the full truth of what happened. But he definitely got a lot of attention when he came here. I think ultimately what I was told by some of the people who were involved with the Boys on the Tracks, what they told me was that some of the things that Billy Jack told the law enforcement here just didn't really add up. But I'll preface that and say that with that, we also have a long history here in Arkansas of corruption at a lot of different levels. It's a lot better now, but man, back when all that was going on, just because a law enforcement agency would say, "Nah, this guy's story doesn't really add up," to me, I don't. That really doesn't necessarily answer the question. So we may never know.
I did interview the private investigator on it that Billy put me in contact with. I guess he kind of got his wish in the end, going to jail, because it seemed like he wanted to go to jail for something. But from what the private investigator told me, it was similar to what you said. They just couldn't collaborate him with the situation. So I'm not exactly sure why he was implicating himself. But we all know from wrestling too that concussions
Sure.
can cause mental health issues, sadly.
When Billy Jack, just from, and Hannibal, you knew him way more than I did. I may have met him once in passing at a convention or something, but he was one of those guys, the stories, because I watched the shoot interviews you did with him. I watched all of those because it was fast. He was a fascinating guy to listen to, and he had all those stories about being sparring partners with those boxers when he was younger, and all these things. What's true, what's not. I don't know. I'm sure some of it's true. Perhaps all of it is. I don't know. I know Billy Jack, I'll say this in his own right, in my opinion, I think he was an excellent worker. God knows in his prime, he had a great physique. But God bless him. He had his demons, and it was a sad day when I saw that he was arrested and everything that went on with that. It's a tragic story.
I was looking forward to going to Arkansas for that awards ceremony. Hopefully I'll go again, but I find that you guys get the bad rap, and I don't mean this as an insult, for being like the most hick state for outsiders, like from people from Canada, for instance, or the UK or Australia. They'll be like, "Oh, well, Arkansas." But like when I watch videos of you, there's very fancy buildings. Obviously, you're very intelligent. Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton are from there. Do you think it gets a bad rap?
I think it definitely can. I don't think it's as bad now as it once was. And, one of the reasons for that is, so Arkansas is a very eclectic place. And Northwest Arkansas is the home of Walmart. The founder is from there. And that's a company that, as you know, is international powerhouse. And that part of the state is growing exponentially. JB Hunt, other industries are there that are international. And so we have Arkansas is really interesting. And you brought up Bill Clinton, and we know where that went. He was the governor, and then he became president. And so we have a lot of hidden gems, here in Arkansas, going back to, me honoring Tommy and some other people. And we have just a lot of interesting stuff from here. But no, it's definitely so back. Just jump back a little bit. In my 20s, I was on a couple reality TV shows. And so I was like 26 and had a broke off engagement. And that was back when MySpace was around to date it. And so that was when all these VH1 shows were on, and Rock of Love and Flavor of Love and all that. And I told one of my buddies, I said, man, I want to see if I can get on one of those. And the first thing we talked about is, well, you say Arkansas, they're going to think I should wear overalls and, chew on a stick of hay and all that. So we came up with the tagline, Southern gentleman with a wild side. And I flew down to Miami and wore like one of those, I called them the Brett Michaels cowboy hat. I don't remember what they were called, but I flew down there and tried out. But that was I had to really brand it in a certain way, because if you just said, hey, I'm some guy from Arkansas, they would have done that. But I do think it's better than it was.
And what show was that, if anyone wants to look you up?
Yeah, sure. Well, it was on VH1. It was called Megan Wants a Millionaire. It was a really interesting thing, Hannibal. My friends and I joke that most stuff I get involved with, it ends up just being, I don't know, bizarre, odd, whatever word you want to use. So the show I was on, if you look up Megan Wants a Millionaire, it actually ended 3 episodes in, which was the last episode I was on. And you see your picture there, Ryan Jenkins, who's up on the top, the dark-headed gentleman. He allegedly murdered his girlfriend in Las Vegas and fled. Yeah, there. I think I'm on the back row on the left. If you see me.
Oh yeah, you're the big guy. Hey, you're looking like quite a Southern gentleman there.
Yeah, but
you got that Backstreet Boy look to you.
Well, that was a long time ago, but the show was canceled because Ryan I say the word allegedly, killed his girlfriend in Vegas. He was on it was a big deal on Nancy Grace at the time. The Coast
Okay.
Guard chased him to Canada where he allegedly hung himself in a hotel room. And I say allegedly because a lot of that was an interesting story as well. But hey man, it was a great experience to be on it. There's Megan there, and
I mean, who was she other
she
than
was
someone that wanted to marry a millionaire? And are you a millionaire?
well. Good questions, Hannibal. So Megan was originally on Rock of Love, the Bret Michaels dating show. So this was a spinoff for her. As am I a millionaire or not? Hey, I'll just say this, I work hard, I've been in the sand, gravel, and dirt business a long time. That's what always has paid the bills. I wanted to make a living in professional wrestling. That was always the goal, like yourself. My goal was to get the contract and for various reasons, it didn't happen. And so here I
We
am.
were both in the same age category that it was when AEW did not exist and there was like WWE or to a much lesser extent TNA. We were pretty much screwed.
That's true. And Hannibal, I'll tell you this too, man. I remember back, I've seen some of your matches, especially from that era. Dude, you could go, man. I mean, you were a great worker. You could you could do a lot of things in the ring that a lot of the guys can't do now. And so I just want to commend you for that. Timing's everything. And if you had been born in an earlier time, I think it would have been a different story. So I just want to let you know, man,
Yeah.
from a former worker and a guy in the business, I thought you were really a talented worker.
I appreciate it. I would have fit in better in the territory days for sure. ATF media, I mean, I'm not a political guy, but someone says how many schools in Arkansas were having forced gender reassignment surgeries in high school because apparently Donald Trump said that was a real thing. And I'm Canadian, I'm not even political. I'm just putting up the question.
Oh yeah, sure. Hey man, and I welcome any questions at all. Look, I'll just say this. I mean, to answer that question, the obvious answer, is no. That's not going on in the state of Arkansas. My goal as a state representative is to work for the people of Arkansas, make that a better place, and my priorities that does not include transgender issues because at least in my view, it's not an issue here in the state of Arkansas. That's Matt's opinion.
Very good. Now, as far as what drew you to pro wrestling, apparently you started becoming a pro wrestling fan at the age of 12. Is that when you started to want to be in the business? And I guess was the sand, gravel, and dirt the family business?
Yeah. So yes, the long story short, yes, sand, gravel, dirt. My grandpa he drove a dump truck and sold dirt. I mean, so it was a grassroots family. I came from a family of sports fans and basketball players, things of that nature. When I was a kid, I was that guy, Hannibal. Shame to say, I hated pro wrestling. I was the guy watching the pay per views when my brothers, understood and appreciated. I was the guy saying the dreaded F word, about pro wrestling. And what changed was when I was 13 years old, we went to Disney World and Dick Murdoch was on the plane. Well, I didn't know who Dick Murdoch was, but my dad did, my brothers. I can still hear my brothers saying, "Hey, Dad, there's Captain Redneck Dick Murdoch," And my dad went over and introduced himself to Dick Murdoch, and Murdoch was he wasn't what I thought he would be. He was a really big, legitimately big guy, legit 6'5", and my dad was like 6'2". So being a kid, seeing a guy tower over your dad, but he spoke like a businessman. He was talking about business in Japan, and I didn't know a lot about wrestling. I remember asking him, well, what's the big boss man doing now? Because I knew he was as a kid, with his gimmick and theme music and everything. So long story short, we were on the plane, and he was a super nice guy to myself, and so that kind of got me interested. And I thought, maybe I'm the one missing something with pro wrestling because I knew it had been on TV since the inception, with boxing and the news and had been around. I thought, well, maybe I'm the guy that has it wrong. So that Saturday night, there was a syndicated show. I believe it was WCW Pro or Worldwide. And the first match I saw was Dirty Dick Slater and Buckhouse Buck with Colonel Robert Parker. I don't remember who they wrestled now, but I saw Dick Slater do a swinging net breaker, and I saw Colonel Parker's gimmick. And Hannibal, really since that time, I mean, I was just completely hooked and obsessed on the business. And, that began my journey, I guess.
Hey, just so I can tweet you the Twitter version of this, could you share your Twitter to this?
I do not have a
Oh, you
Twitter,
don't have Twitter.
Hannibal,
Okay.
and it's in the world of politics. I've found it's not, at least the level I'm at, it's not advantageous to get into that world.
I think ATF Media, who I'll give him a break because he's a Ron Garvin fan, he's really going after you today. Why did prices go down on January 20th? Like the Billy. And again, I like Trump as a WWE Hall of Famer. I'm just asking this for the fan. Um, do you want to answer any of this? I think I've been overly generous with you, ATF, after these ones.
Well, look, I'll say this to again, I'm a state level politician, and so my job is to handle things at the state level. I really have no say in the federal government. I will say this in response to his question about prices. Look, man, there's no question that the prices of things are through the roof. I mean, when I'll give an example, I was passing through. I'm not John Kerry who got busted doing a political ad at a Wendy's and picking around his food and then going and eating, fancy food out in his RV or whatever. Look, I go to Wendy's, I eat the Dave's Double Man, and I go to McDonald's. Well, it wasn't long ago. I was traveling somewhere and I
How
went through
many
McDonald's.
Dave's triples can you eat at once? I know you could put back at least 3.
No, no, man. Maybe, but I was in this McDonald's and this couple came in. They couldn't afford a combo meal. They got a drink and something else. A guy came in, he got off work. What'd he get? He didn't get a number one. He got a value fry. And I remember the worker accidentally rung it up as a large. And man, he wasn't rude about it. But he said, "Man, no, that's not what I ordered. I ordered this." So there's no doubt. I mean, here in America, prices of things are through the roof, and I hope that gets worked out. Again, I'm not a federal government guy, and I hope that it changes for everyone because there's no question. Look, I'm not going to sit here and deny that the prices of stuff in this country's got to go down for the people. There's no doubt.
Well, I definitely agree with you on that era of WCW. I think it's underrated. People will talk about that era of WCW with the Colonel Parker as one of the lower eras. You're telling me that actually helped motivate you to become a wrestler. I actually like that early 90s era of WCW better than the early 90s era of WWE. That's just my personal opinion. So it's around this time you make the switch. Were you an athlete at all at this point? You looked like you were probably a football player.
That's funny, and I take that as a compliment because in the wrestling business, Hannibal, it was very much, especially when you and I were going for it, man. It was a body business, and you and I know a big part of it is genetics. But to answer your question, anyway, I get off on that. But no, I was a basketball guy actually, and I played basketball through high school until one day, unfortunately, I messed up my knee. It was a dislocation, but it wasn't like a normal, just, hey, we'll push the knee over and do 30 days of rehab going, man. I mean, it was real bad dislocation. They had to, stretcher me off the field. And that was essentially out of it. But before that time, I basically did everything in the business except ring announce. I'd still like to do that maybe at least once to say I did it. But I started out, there was an independent show here in town. There was a journeyman wrestler. His name was Bill Ash, who his claim to fame was, he was a journeyman guy. And he had some good runs in Continental and out in California. But anyway, he was running shows, and I went to an independent show. I asked a guy for a card. That's how I got involved. I started out making programs. I would design the programs. I would go to the matches. I would take the pictures. I'd staple them together, and then I'd go try and hustle them for $2 a piece at the matches. So that's how I started. And then ultimately, that promotion folded. And I was like, well, I have all these connections with these guys. And, this was pre-internet, man. It was a different time for wrestling. And I had the connections, and I thought, man, if I want to see wrestling or be involved, I'm just going to have to do it myself. So I was 17 years old and did it. Promoted my first wrestling show at 17. And being a promoter, Hannibal, you probably remember a lot of the numbers like I did. My first show, we drew 225 fans in this little town in Arkansas called Briggsville, Arkansas, Fush Valley. And it was a fundraiser for their FFA. I made my debut that night as a heel manager. And I think I was a natural heel, especially at that time. And some of those guys, some of those big guys on the front row that showed up in the overalls that people, when you think Arkansas, that's those guys, man, I got them riled
They
up.
look like the Godwins.
Exactly. And they were throwing bottles at me. We did a screw job finish at the end. Because I remember Bill came to me and he said, "Do we want to send them home happy or do we want to, make them mad?" And knowing what I know now, at a house show, you want to send them home happy. But Bill was a natural heel too, and he was a bit ornery. So we did a screw job finish, and man, the place just went off. Man, they were not happy about it. So that's how it went. And then ultimately, Bill said I was ready for a wrestling match, and went on with it.
You quit wrestling school 3 times though before you ultimately became a wrestler. Was this during the whole period that you were already wrestling, or was this before you got your first match?
That was before my first match. So I go back to when I was 13 or 14, and the guy gave me the business card, and I got in. Well, the first thing I did was my dad drove me over to Paris, Arkansas, is the name of the town. So I went over there, and the deal that Bill Ash had was there was a boxing promoter. The boxing promoter had the building, and this was the old school days. I mean, you see wrestling schools now, and they have a big tall ceiling, AC, painted nice, all this stuff. Man, this was none of that. This was termites in the building. The ceiling wasn't even high enough to take a backdrop or do a vertical suplex. The ring had a plastic tarp on it, as opposed to that. Anyway, so I went, and the first thing I did, Hannibal, like a lot of people, the first thing I did trying to take my first bump, I was like, man, this really hurts. This is not fake at all. And I went to Bill. I said, "Bill, I really think I just want to be a promoter now." And he said, "Well, if you're going to promote, you're going to book any," he said, "you need to learn this." And so, about that time's when I hurt my knee playing basketball a little bit later. So that took me out of that. So I quit then. And then I went back. So my freshman year of college, I went to a school here. It's called Arkansas Tech University. I went there because I really didn't know where I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to be in wrestling. And so while I was doing that, we would train on Sunday afternoons. And so I would go to the wrestling school and train. And it was, I was a C average guy that year, but I was telling my parents I was going to the library to study, but I was actually driving an hour and a half to Paris, Arkansas to go train to be a wrestler. And I'd come back, and couldn't move my neck when my dad would try to talk to me if I was at the computer or whatever. So they knew what was going on. And they finally said, "Hey, we'll support you all the way with this. And we're behind you." But anyway, so that was the second time I went, and actually I quit that second time. Long story short, I had a confrontation at the pro wrestling school with another one of the students. In hindsight, it wasn't nearly as big of a deal as I thought of it at the time. But when you're 19 years old, things seem a little bit worse than maybe they were. So I quit, and then, like I said, finally the third time I said, "Man, I've got to go do this thing and get it done." So I went back for another 6 months, and Bill told me, "Hey," he said, "you're ready for your first match." And I said, "Man, are you sure about this?" Because I really didn't want, Hannibal, a lot of times they rush people in the ring, and, I wanted to do everything I could to not embarrass myself, as my first match.
Yeah, I think I had my first match was almost no training. It was like by my 7th match that I'd finally been trained, because it was just a case of Stampede wrestling was really bad in those days, and it's like, who wants to wrestle? We don't have enough to pay wrestlers. Who wants to wrestle for free? So we would just basically get in there and get our ass beat.
Well, and Hannibal, I know you were a very accomplished amateur wrestler, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you were a much better athlete than I was, so you could get in there. And I had at that time in Arkansas, we didn't even have amateur wrestling at all. So,
Yeah, and I've heard that you have a program now, right? The state university doesn't have a program for
yeah,
amateur wrestling.
amateur wrestling is all over the state of Arkansas now. It's a big deal, and we have men and women's divisions, and it's a really big deal. And I'm glad to see it, man. It's a great sport.
So what was the hardest part about wrestling school other than your heat with the other wrestler? Was there one thing that you were having a hard time picking up, or one thing that was just so painful you're like, "Oh, I don't know if I want to do this"?
Well, I guess I'll start with what I was good at, and or at least what I felt more comfortable with. I don't want to say I was ever great at it, but all the chain wrestling sequences, all that kind of stuff, because I would go home and work on that stuff and get it in my mind. So things of that nature I was okay at. But man, Hannibal, I was not a gymnast. Okay. My mom took me to gymnastics one time when I was a kid. I fell off the balance beam and I cried until she came pick me up. So when I went to wrestling school the first time, and the school we went to, and then at least in my experience, the old school training, we didn't do the rolls like a lot of schools do now. We did what we called tuck and fall bumps, is what Bill called them. And that's where, you just stand there and you jump in there, you do a flip, land on your back. And when I saw those guys doing that, I was like, oh man, like it's like the biggest mountain in the world for me to try to climb, to do a flip in any fashion. And, we did the deal, Hannibal, I don't know if it's the same way for you, but at the rest of schools, a guy gets on all fours, you get to where you can flip over him and not kill yourself. And then eventually you get to where you can take hip tosses, snap mares, things of that nature, and just do them over and over again. And once I got to where I could do that, it's just a mental thing. You know how that was, Hannibal. It was certain guys could certainly jump high.
With me, it was the arm drags, because it's like you have to trust that the guy is going to move, and you kind of like throw yourself, and like you have that mental.
No, it's so mental, but that was the hardest thing for me. But once I could stand in one spot, jump, do a flip, and land on my back and not injure myself, that was the hardest part for me. That road that I would drive to go to the wrestling school, Hannibal, I'm not on it much anymore. It's Highway 22. Every time I get on that road, my stomach still hurts because I think, man, I'm going to have to jump in there, do a flip, land on my back. So that was that was the hardest thing for me, was anything remotely like a gymnast I couldn't do, which is a big reason why I'm glad I got out of it when I did, because as you know now, if you're not a gymnast,
yeah, especially in like New Japan, you got to be a gymnast. I wish they would go back to the Bruiser Brody and the Stan Hansen, because yes, they say okay, they're better athletes now, but I don't want to watch gymnasts. I want to watch football or amateur wrestling. I've never been interested in Olympic gymnastics. I wish they would go back to more of the ass kickers, and there are some, but the gymnasts kind of have it easier than us these days, whereas the previous generation, we would have had the advantage.
Sure. Well, yeah, and our generation was definitely about size, and Hannibal, you're a naturally larger guy, and I'm legitimately 6'1". Now I'm 275. Back then I was 220 and looked like
with traps comparable to Brock Lesnar. I got to tell you,
your traps. I appreciate that, man. I'll tell you, Hannibal. If you look at my old wrestling pictures, when I started, and I don't mean this to knock on him at all. Look, I've loved your interviews with Sam Houston and love his stories. But I used to joke with my guys. I said, man, I look like I'm working out like Kurt Angle, and I look like Sam Houston off the sauce. You know what I mean? And so it certainly wasn't from lack of effort, but it was a different time too, Hannibal. Back then, when I was in my early 20s, what knowledge did we have about how to eat and what to do? It was the fitness magazines. And what did they say? Eat 6 small meals a day. Some of it was, well, here's it, eat a half a cup of cottage cheese and do all that. And, I needed calorie dense foods, and I needed to get the calories in to grow. And, it was after I ran for political office when I finally started. Well, I guess towards the end of my career, I got up to about 260. And with my frame, until I got to 260, I didn't look big at all. I mean, when I was 225, I looked like I was 180 pounds, my frame. And I remember Bill Ash telling me when I was in wrestling school back, 15 years old, I remember he looked at me, he said, you can carry 260 pounds easy. And I said, man, I just thought he was crazy. Well, he was right. I mean, because when I wrestled, when I was 260, I felt like I was much lighter on my feet. Once I got to 280-ish, the most I got up to was 301, which I had the one because I really worked hard to hit it, because I wanted to just go through the process, see what it was like. It was a miserable process. I mean, trying to eat, I was trying to eat 4,400 calories a day, which doesn't sound like that much on paper, but man, Hannibal, once you get to that last meal and you say, man, I got to eat 2,000 calories. I'm going to go to Chili's and eat a molten cake, whatever the hell, to get it down. it was a miserable process, and my health wasn't, my blood pressure was high and everything else, but I wanted the process. And, I was really trying to bench press as much as I could just because I enjoyed it. I'm not a competitive lifter, probably never, well, I never will be with what these guys, these numbers these guys are throwing up now.
Yeah, I know. And all the gimmicks that they use. I mean, some of them wear these body suits, and it's like, why even count that if you have to wear these bench press suits?
Yeah,
But,
I've always been a big fan of raw strength. I think you have been too. You look at the old strongman videos, I'm a huge mark for Ken Patera, back with his work and everything. And I've really enjoyed your shoot interviews.
You should get him honored in the Arkansas Hall of Fame somehow, because they're not going to put him in until he dies. I know he's too outspoken.
Well,
get him in there somehow.
So check this out too. I'll give you a quick Ken Patera. This is another one of my quote odd stories, right? Ken Patera, when he got out of wrestling, he worked for a company and sold sand screens for sand plants for the heavy equipment construction business, which is what I'm in. So we actually bought screens for our sand plants from the company that Ken Patera worked at until he retired. How crazy is that? So
that's pretty damn cool. I love Ken. He's like a grandfather type figure, like the bad grandfather.
Hannibal, did you ever try and do the swinging full Nelson like him? Do you ever attempt it?
No, but that would have you? That would be a good thing to bring back.
Oh, I tried it, and man, no, I was never hoss enough to do it. And just what little bit I tried, I mean, well, I haven't seen really anybody do it since then that I can think of. But
because Chris Masters never did it. He never did the swinging version, to my remembrance.
To do the swing, Hannibal, I mean, you've got to be a hoss. I mean, you've got to be really exceptionally strong to do it. But no, there's not many moves I didn't try at some point.
So as far as your match with Jerry Lawler, that was in I don't know what venue it was in, but you're in a big arena, you're in a cage match, and you're against probably I would say you're the most famous wrestler from that territory in the history of like Memphis wrestling / Arkansas wrestling. What was that night like for you, and how did that match come about?
Yeah, so that was for a promoter named Burt Prentice, who passed away a few years ago. And it was at the Omen Arena, they call it, in Jackson, Tennessee, which, little interesting aside, Jackson, Tennessee is the area where Dr. D. David Schultz still lives. And, I met with Dr. D because one of the last shows I was going to promote before I got out of it, Dr. D and Lawler did not get along at all. And Dr. D was so insulted and just upset that he was not asked to be a part of those shows. In the town he lived, in the gymnasium he played sports in, and all that. Anyway, didn't mean to get off on that, but no, it's called the Omen Arena in Jackson, Tennessee. It's a really neat venue. Burt Prentice was the promoter. It was called USA Championship Wrestling, and their TV shows, I think, are still online somewhere. I had a hand in the production. I always enjoyed the production side of wrestling as well. That's a whole other animal to get into, but I enjoyed that. But no, wrestling Jerry Lawler, I mean, he was the best I was ever in the ring with. I don't know how many times I wrestled him, 30 times maybe. I wrestled him all over Tennessee at high school gyms. I wrestled him down in Dallas one time as well years ago. He was always just a great, I mean, it was a great time to wrestle Jerry. And, for myself, I just recall, for me as a worker, Hannibal, the biggest compliment that I received was when I was in the ring with Jerry Lawler and I backed him in a corner and he said, "You call it." And that really took me aback because he hadn't done that. So then I called, the rest of the match. But to have Jerry Lawler tell me to call the match at a certain point, and I don't care what era Jerry Lawler that was. I mean, I know that was in the last few years of him wrestling, but I took that as a huge compliment. But it was always a night off. And Hannibal, I wish you could have seen some of the matches we had in some of those Tennessee towns. We did Tennessee has all these different spots that really worked well there that, may not work as well in Dallas, back in the territory days. And even now, I think it's still the different areas I wrestled in. I tried to work the style that was over in that territory because what worked in Tennessee, probably is not going to work in Dallas or work in California. But anyway, but no, I mean, we would do the hide the object thing, where I had the foreign object and would hide it in my armpits, my tights, hand it to the manager. And I mean, there were fans that, I'm sure modern fans think, a riot, not really. But I mean, Hannibal, the pot was boiling many, many times, and it would not have taken much to pull it over. But I never wanted to actually cause an actual riot. I wanted to get the pot to the boiling point, but then, not see the building get torn apart.
Yeah, I heard you say in another news interview that when you were still in high school as a wrestler, you had a bottle thrown at you. Is that the most serious case of violence against you that you've had as a wrestler?
No, no, not close. So Mike Jackson, he was running shows in Alabama. He may still be. I mean, he's ran shows in Alabama for years. And so, he booked me out there. And so in the world of college football, the Arkansas Razorbacks, that's our team, man. And we don't have a pro team here. So that's our team. So I had some wrestling trunks made in Arkansas colors, and on the back put Arkansas Oak on them. So that was the gimmick I rode with. I had a manager with the Arkansas state flag. And so we went out to Alabama, and those Alabama fans hate Arkansas Razorbacks, man. So we'd go out there, I'd cut a promo, call the Hogs. And Mike Jackson told me, he said, man, all you got to do is go out there and do your stick. And he said, get upset if your hair's messed up. He said, you've got the heat. It doesn't really matter at that point. But there were a couple nights in particular. One night, and I remember back in the day when Bill trained me, I said, Bill, what is the most heat-getting finish that you think a guy can do? And he said, throw your feet on the ropes pin 'em. I said, really? I said, that's it? Because, when you're younger, you really want to try to do more creative stuff or a big move finish or whatever. And well, that particular night, that's what I did. The opponent made his big comeback. He comes in the corner, I sweep his feet, throw the feet up on the ropes, get the pin, and roll out. And, I wear contact lenses. And through the years, they got better and wouldn't pop out as much. But at that time, if I took a real hard shoulder tackle or something, it was not uncommon for one of my contacts to go flying out, and I couldn't see. And so I get out of the ring, and I can only see out of one eye. But what I saw, and it was a smaller gym, but there were legitimately about 400 people there, which, as you and I know, for an independent crowd, is a respectable size crowd. And I had there was a guy with a cane walking towards me. There was a guy in a wheelchair coming at me, and somebody else I couldn't see. And I was using some choice words with the ref because he came down and raised my hand. I said, you got to get me out of here because I can't see. And I guess the referee didn't know where the locker room was. So instead of taking me to the locker room, he took me to the concession stand. And so I had to wait it out in the concession stand and, let them die down a little bit. And then I just threw a towel over my head and, kind of went back to the locker room. But it was that one night there were guys in the parking lot legitimately outside. They were waiting on me with knives. When I would go there, I would park my car at a space far away and I would back it in to where they wouldn't see the Arkansas plates, in case they looked at my car. And, some fans now may say, man, you're embellishing it. And I've seen some interviews, with Shawn Michaels where, he kind of, to me, in my view, he kind of misinterprets it. He leads people to believe that we're kind of embellishing a lot of the wrestling stories. And there's no doubt some are. But Hannibal, man, I mean, these stories I'm telling you, man, it's the truth. That's what happened. That was not, that was in probably 2000, 5, 10, something in that era. Wasn't that long ago. And man, if I was booked in Alabama and I got the heat the way Mike Jackson wanted me to do, because, that was my goal. If I was booked to wrestle on a show or manage or whatever, my goal was to do what the booker wanted to a T and do what they wanted. And Mike he wanted to get heat. He wanted to get that real legitimate heat. And you bring an Arkansas Razorback to Alabama, man, you can blow every spot and miss a punch by a foot. It doesn't matter. You're gonna get it.
Yeah, and what do you think today? And I know you're political, so you don't want to go after them too much. But some of these wrestlers will complain about getting their feelings hurt, or you said this is over the line, and they want the fan thrown out of the building, and such a big hoopla is made. But you're talking about situations where you're actually being physically attacked. To me, if a fan's yelling something at me and hates me, I mean, that's just part of the job. But it seems like today you also can't offend the wrestler for whatever reason.
Yeah, well, I think we're kind of from the same cloth, Hannibal. I one of my goals in wrestling, I always wanted to get booked in Puerto Rico, and it didn't happen, because the timing and whatever, I couldn't get booked over there. But I always just thought, man, that would be the ultimate. Some guys would come back and say, man, such and such came back. They got scared. They were throwing stuff at him. I was like, man, like, get me booked over there, man. Spend the day on the beach and go to the gym and, attracted women in Puerto Rico everywhere and go and get that kind of heat. I said, man, that'd be awesome. And I didn't actually get to do it. So I can only, say what I think my experience would have been like. But no, man, I lived for the heat. But to your question on the sensitivity, and this is where politics and pro wrestling has been such a similar journey for me. So, for example, when we receive emails or calls or texts from constituents, and I mean this, I'm blessed to have the district I am. I represent 31,000 people here in Arkansas, and I'm not just saying this. The district's been so nice and respectful to me. Every now and then you may get a message from somebody, but my point I'm getting to is it's very similar in politics, because there are politicians that come to me and they're just beside themselves because they received this text or email from someone they represent in the state of Arkansas, and they're so offended by it. And I read it and I'm like, that doesn't bother me. And I've encouraged constituents and taxpayers of the state of Arkansas. I said, look, man, hold our feet to the fire. We're your employee. Say what's on your mind. Get involved. That makes for better government, So it's kind of the same way there. But back to your question on wrestling, this is just my view. And, I watch an AEW episode every 6 months if I'm traveling and I see it on. And apparently they have, good television coverage because it's on about every hotel room I'm in on a weekend. And I'll watch it. And I've watched some WWE stuff still. To me, it's just my view. Braun Breaker's the man to me. I mean, that's the guy. We all play fantasy football with booking. In my view, they should have put the rocket pack on him.
He should have had the Goldberg push. They should not have jobbed him to Zayn, in my opinion.
Totally
like, agree. He'll get over it, but it was a kink in his armor that he did not need.
Totally agree. But to me, Hannibal, I wanted to be in the pro wrestling business. The first, large scale live event I went to was WCW at Barton Coliseum, and it was Flair against Luger. And I remember there was just shy of a sellout, and the Barton Coliseum was about 8,000 for wrestling. So we'll say there was 7,500 there. And Flair took, and I remember I counted them, he took 7 overhead press slams from Luger. And every time he took that slam, there were flash bulbs, all over the arena. And, my dad went, my brothers went, and my brother's friends went. They would bring their girlfriends. And I still remember one of my brother's friend's girlfriends was standing up in her chair looking at Flair after they did the spot, Hannibal, where Flair's bare behind is exposed and Luger's press slamming him with that. And this girl was looking at him. And the way she looked at Ric Flair, I saw Flair and I said, that's the guy I want to be. And to be that guy, I'm going to have to learn how to tan, and I'm going to have to love to lift weights. and that was, because Flair didn't have a horrible physique at all in my estimation, but you put anybody against Luger, who had just an unbelievable physique. But anyway, I saw that and I said, that's the guy I want to be. I want to be the guy who, the men want to be and the women want to be with. And that was the goal as a teenage guy to get into wrestling. I thought that would beat working a normal job,
And the one thing I'll warn young wrestlers about, because it just came out last week since you mentioned it, Flair now has skin cancer, apparently, according to Conrad Thompson from tanning. And I know you did a podcast where steroids in wrestling got controversial, but it's like tanning is something that gets overlooked a lot. that it seems like a lot of wrestlers end up with skin cancer out of that. And that's nothing to laugh about either. But as I was searching you up, it seems like at one point you had a podcast and
Mhm.
you had someone on, Dave Palumbo, who was
Mhm.
involved with the WWE wellness policy, and he made some comment related to Triple H not being on steroids, but I don't know if he addressed TRT, which is pretty much, you could call that steroids, but apparently he alluded that HGH, human growth hormone, might be allowed. Could you tell us what that whole controversy was about?
Yeah, so I'd have to go back, but first, Dave Palumbo. So to listeners who don't know who that is, Dave Palumbo was a very well-known bodybuilder at that time, and he was Triple H's quote nutritionist. Okay. And so I knew Dave because I've been friends. You know how it is in wrestling, Hannibal. You get to know guys in the fitness and in bodybuilding world as well at times. And I don't recall exactly how it came about, but Dave came on the show, and he was just very much, loose with the language when it came to that stuff. And me being, as a journalist, I just started asking him the questions, and I don't recall all of it, but I know when we released it, after we released that, he was no longer Triple H's nutritionist, or they announced he wasn't, because he was the guy that would put together the nutrition plans for Triple H before Triple H would get dialed in for Mania, and it was not an intentional thing at all. But man, when that came out, it got some press, I recall.
Yeah. And now from everything I've read, they do allow TRT, which is basically prescribed testosterone. I don't know. I know. I mean, the levels. It all depends on what they set their limits at and stuff. But for a while, ever since Brock Lesnar failed that UFC test, we knew that there was discrepancies with the testing and what type of contract they have. But now it seems it's just like when WCW was around, it seemed WWE kind of dropped their testing, and it seems with AEW around again, it might be less strict. Just by me as a bodybuilder myself and weightlifter myself, looking at how some of the physiques have changed
Mhm.
over the past few years, it seems like there's a lot more jacked guys than there was.
Well, there's definitely a lot more lean guys for sure. I mean, you see a lot more 6 and 8 pack abs on TV, than you did. But to your comment earlier, Hannibal, I was a fan of well, I'd say physical wrestling, but to me, that's just good wrestling. I mean, I want to see guys that they can throw a work punch and just barely tap a guy on the nose, and the guy do a great sell job, and half the front row stands up and thinks, man, he just cleaned his clock. I mean, to me, the art of really great working punches, I don't see that anymore. And very few matches, at least that I've seen, start with a lockup and go into some good chain wrestling before you start running the spots. And just my opinion of what I see now, what's disappointing to me is there's no question that most of these guys are athletic enough to do, I mean, anything. I mean, stuff I struggled with and couldn't incorporate in matches, these guys could do with their eyes closed. But to me, it has a lack of psychology and storytelling, and it's not what I'm a fan of. I still watch old school wrestling. I mean, at night, I mean, it just could be anything. Could be anything from Tatsumi Fujinami to Buzz Sawyer to Bob Orton Jr. to whatever. But nonetheless, Matt Bourne was another one you had on. I was friends with Matt before he passed. I thought he
Oh, do
was.
you have any stories you could share about Matt? He's a very popular subject on this channel.
I do. So when I was running my company, Traditional Championship Wrestling, Matt Bourne was living down in Texas. Well, I was friends with a promoter there, and he said, "Hey, Matt's on. Matt's looking for work and this and that." So long story short, we had a show booked, and we had Jay Lethal booked on it. And also, I was friends, still am good friends with Bruno Lauer, downtown Bruno, Harvey Wippleman, whatever you want to call him, who's actually in politics as well down in Walls, Mississippi. He's actually on the quorum court down there. So we still talk. He's one of the few guys in the business, along with like Bushwhacker Luke. I still talk to him. So I still talk to those guys. But so Bruno was on the card. Well, WWE caught wind that he was on the card with a TNA star, which at that time they weren't going to allow it. So I was always taught, Hannibal, when you book a show, if you have an advertised talent that is not going to appear, you need to have a substitute that is of equal name value or greater as the substitute for the fans. That was always the rule I tried to do. So long story short, that led me to Matt Bourne. Well, I was a huge mark for the heel Doink character, man. I still just think it was awesome. And so I asked him, I said, can you come do the heel Doink? Well, he had been out of the business, so he didn't have the wig. He didn't have the stuff. And I said, man, let me see what I can put together. So I actually got the green wig, had it sewn onto a white mask. I actually ordered these giant clown shoes online, which were these really heavy clown shoes. And Matt came in and I showed him the shoes. I said, I don't know if you want to work in these, but I thought they'd be good for a photo shoot. He said, oh yeah, I'd work in those, And so he worked the match. And I said, hey, can you go over with the whoopee cushion? He said,
do you have this on tape somewhere?
Yeah, I do. And he came out and he wrestled in these clown shoes. And man, he just tore the house down. He went up, he could still come off the top rope. He did, I don't know if he did it working everybody or not, but he looked like he was about to fall off the top rope to the floor. But he executed the whoopee cushion. And so Matt, I'll get to my story. So Matt worked for me for, we'll say 6 months. I don't know. And Matt was very akin to Buddy Landell, and I was friends with Buddy, and Buddy worked with me, and I traveled with Buddy for a while. And to me, they were so similar. They were unbelievably talented, but once they got back on the road, even if it was just a few times a month on independent wrestling, that led them back to alcohol, other things, and women they had not seen in a long time. So Matt came in, and we had a deal in Fort Smith, Arkansas. We had to deal with a casino there, and they gave us free rooms for the guys, right, Hannibal? So you know that how much those hotel rooms can add up if you don't have them comped. So Matt had one of his, friends from the past with him, and I wake up that next morning, and a guy was working for me named King Shane Williams, who was a great worker, independent guy. He calls me, says, man, Matt got arrested. And I'm thinking like, you're ribbing me. I was, whatever. He said, no, man, I'm serious. He said, Matt's in jail. I said, okay. So we go to the show. I start rewriting. This is when we're doing the TV. So we would take 3 or 4 shows a month at a time. So I'm writing. We actually called him Boink the Clown to keep from any issues with WWE. So we changed the D to a B, for whether that's cool or not. And so anyway, the call time, whatever the call time was, I don't remember. And I'm looking at the clock. Here it comes. In walks Matt. Like how he got out of jail, I don't know. And so I looked at Matt. I handed him his envelope. I said, brother, here you go. I appreciate all you've done, but you're going to have to go away for a while, man. We can't have that. And so Matt left. So I guess I left out why he got arrested. So what happened is one of my guys gave him a bottle of Crown Royal as a gift. Horrible idea. And in hindsight, if I could have stopped it, I would have. But long story short, he allegedly drugged this woman down the hallway by the hair of the head through the hall of this hotel casino. And this woman's screaming that he's trying to kill her and all this stuff. The cops come. They arrest Matt. The next morning, I assume the woman may have been drinking too. She's like, man, this was a mistake. We're okay now. I don't want to press charges, that kind of thing. And ultimately that. And then Matt didn't speak to me for a long time. But what was interesting, Hannibal, 2 weeks before he died, he contacted me and apologized and buried the hatchet. And Buddy Landell, actually, I won't get into all that, but same thing. You got
to give us a Buddy Landell story.
Okay, let me think, because there's man.
Yeah. Okay, well, it sounds like you might have to come back for a podcast just on Buddy Landell.
I was on the road with him for a while, and I was driving his Mercedes around, to conventions. And
how did he own a Mercedes? How did he afford this?
Well, it was an older model Mercedes, Hannibal, so it was not a brand new Mercedes, but Buddy was so talented, and so charismatic and well spoken. And he, bless his heart, he had his demons, and to say, it was so interesting. 2 weeks before he passed, he called and apologized to me for our situation. And I hated it. I loved the guy. I thought there was no two guys more talented than Matt Warner and Landell, but God bless them. They just had their issues. So hopefully they're in a better place now. Is what I hope for.
Another guy with issues that I've seen you wrestle. We don't get along. It's probably a guy I'd like to have a shoot with. Is Buff Bagwell? Could you share some of your experiences with him?
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know you had issues with him. I know.
He's
So
mad at me because he was drunk in an interview I did with him, and for some reason that's my fault. And he never offered to redo another one free, but apparently he's mad at me because I posted it because I paid him, and he decided to show up drunk.
oh man, well, I'm sorry to hear that. And I know this. Whenever I book talent, if they showed up under the influence like that, and it was always, in my experience, it was always my fault, not theirs for whatever
Yeah,
reason. But
you got to show the fans because, as you mentioned, then the fans don't think you've booked them.
oh man, it
I
was.
mean,
Yeah, I had a disastrous experience one time, Hannibal. I in Arkansas, the shows we were doing our last run, I was drawing legitimately 650-ish paid. One of the last shows I did, we grossed $20,000, for Southern Independent. I
that's
thought
better
that,
than TNA was doing under the Scott D'Amore era.
man, but we did that. But I mean, back on Buff, I can only speak for my experiences. I booked the guy a few times. I was in locker rooms with him and wrestled him. And all of my experiences with Buff were positive. I know that's not, everyone's story, and certainly not yours. And I'm sorry that happened. But, my experiences with Buff were always positive ones.
That's good to hear. Did you ever encounter? I mean, you were a promoter and you're a big guy, but it's less likely to happen to promoter. But did anyone ever try and take liberties with you in the ring?
Man, great question. Yes. Only a handful of times. And when things like that happen, it's one of those things, like, I mean, I certainly always tried to be a professional, never did on the front end. But when it happens, you're like, what is going on with this guy? I mean, I didn't think we had heat. I don't know what the deal is. And so I had a really interesting experience, out in California in a match. He didn't really try. I don't want to say he shot on me, but he was upset about something. And that was Brian Kendrick, out in California. I was wrestling him, and
Oh wow! Of all people, because you're twice the size of him.
well, I appreciate that compliment, but I'd wrestled him out there for a promoter named Billy Blade, great guy out there, and we finished the match, and I told my friends, I said, man, if I could work this guy, I'd work him every day of the week. I mean, it was great. And then the next time I wrestled him, he just seemed distant. I mean, he didn't really want to talk about the match. And maybe, and look, I had no heat with Brian. I don't have any, doesn't matter. It's in the past, but it wasn't the same Brian that I had wrestled. It was like I went from having a match I'd want to have every day of the week. And man, he's a talented guy too. But when we started working, he just didn't really want to work. And then finally, after a few minutes, he did. And there was no issue after the match per se. That was one. Another time, there was an independent guy in Texas that apparently had some substance abuse problems, and we were in a tag match, and he tried something, and I just sprawled out on him and locked him down, and then went right back into the that's the ones that I recall. But as Hannibal, it wasn't as common as people think. And with your background, man, you could have. I mean, I didn't have the amateur background you did, but at Bill Ash's school, we did a lot of shoot wrestling. Bill was big on that, and I hated doing it as a teenager. I mean, I had no amateur background, but he taught us enough to hopefully handle ourselves, when we were in there, So, but that was it. But never anything major.
It's definitely helpful to know if you run across those situations, which are rare, but they do happen. I mean, you read about them still happening in the news from time to time, even in the major. What happened with Thunder Rosa not too long ago in AEW? I'm not sure if you saw that, but there was a bit of a miscommunication, I guess.
Yeah, no, I still keep up. I don't. I finally broke the habit of going to Meltzer's site every day and just reading the headlines or glancing through. And it was
Did
just,
AEW not just cancel a show there not too long ago, or am I getting it confused or
oh,
something?
I'm not 100% sure about that, Hannibal. I do know another interesting Arkansas thing. I just read an article a few days ago that a guy from Arkansas is now in charge of, I believe, their live event touring schedule or something of that nature. So that got some ink in Arkansas. I just thought that was interesting that a guy in Arkansas is now working full time for AEW in their touring. Like I said, Arkansas, it's always
Get yourself in there. Get yourself in there in a match.
no. I
I'll
don't know.
put you over. I'll put you over next time AEW comes to town.
Animal, I don't know. It'd be, God bless them for keep going. But man, if I wrestle now, I think Dory Funk Jr. could work around me, man. It's been a long, I still love to lift weights, but man, I don't even know if I could touch my toes anymore. I'm certainly not in ring condition at all.
What's your chain there? I mean, you got quite a look going.
Yeah. So
To
this is,
You're
I'm
pimping
probably
it up.
politician. So this is a chain I had made. So this is where the wrestling business crosses over. So it's the state of Arkansas with my initials, and 53 is my state rep district number. So this is something I wear to events and everything, So it's, fans elected me to be who I am. I think as a politician, you need to be who you are. And wrestling was a big part of my life. And I'm still somewhat of an entertainer, and politics doesn't have to be boring. I mean, we're handling serious business, but I think we can have fun with it. And I think that the more, the more fun we have, the more people will get out and vote. And that's my deal. I'm for the will of the people. It's like I tell people here, I'm going to work for the people as long as they want me to work for them. If they decide they don't want me to anymore, then I'll go about my business in other ways. But again, a lot of similarities, and I enjoy working for the fans. Hannibal, there's running a political campaign is very similar to promoting an event. You put your plan together to get people at a certain place at a certain time on a certain date, and
Rivals ripping down advertising too.
it's all of it. It's just, instead of selling tickets, your goal is to get them to vote for you. That's the whole deal. And I found it, because I always loved promoting wrestling. I always enjoyed that part of it. I guess I wasn't right in the head.
It's addictive. But I was gonna ask you, since we also cover UFOs and stuff. I haven't heard that much about UAP activity in Arkansas, but now that we have like Anna Paulina Luna's group with Tim Burchett and Marco Rubio and all that, helping disclose some UAP information that has previously been a no-no to talk about on those levels. What's your stance on the whole unidentified anomalous phenomenon and the drone situation that occurred last December? And have you seen it happening much in Arkansas?
No, I have not. And Hannibal, I know you've done a lot of coverage on it. If you get a chance when we get done, if you'd send me a link to some of that stuff, I'd love to watch it. I watch documentaries on all the time, and I always tell people, I'll tell you what I know for sure, what I think I know, and what I don't know. And when it comes to the world of UFOs, I don't know a lot. I will say this: at one time, I went into I guess a research project, if you will, like you do with Area 51. And man, you go down the rabbit hole of Area 51, it's it's interesting. You have this area where, no one's allowed to go. If you go within a certain distance of it, allegedly they're going to shoot you. If you get
Yeah,
near
I
it.
was there a couple months ago, and I followed the rules. Of course, I love the United States. I don't want to get booted out, but the trucks were there watching me. And it's stated very clearly that you are going to get arrested if you cross the line.
Well, I think it's great that you're researching it. And I tell people all the time, you know, we have the internet now. We have all these sources of information, some true, some not, that we didn't have. But I encourage everyone, look, form your own opinions, get out and research it. And, you know, Hannibal, a lot of times, as they say, the truth can be stranger than fiction. And that's that, you know.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting because Donald Trump put out a video earlier this week saying he was going to have a major announcement soon, and some people are wondering if it has something to do with disclosure, because he said it's something that people have been wanting to know for a while, and some people are going to be very surprised by it, and he's looking forward to getting it out. So I won't get my hopes up too much, but that's a domain that I follow. But I appreciate you coming on. Where can everyone follow you if they want to stay up to date with everything happening? Your matches are still airing from your company, by the way, in Arkansas for our Arkansas fans watching.
Yeah, so it was TCW Wrestling, Traditional Championship Wrestling was the brand. We filmed, I don't recall the exact number, 90 something 1 hour HD episodes. Nelson Swegler, who was the president of WWE Television up until I believe 94, long story short, Hannibal, but he came in to work for me for a while and essentially taught me how to take our production to another level, because we had our own equipment and we're doing our own independent thing. But at our peak, I think we were in
Do
close
you
to.
own your footage, or does the TV station own the footage?
No, I own all of our footage. And a little interesting thing. So we had an international distribution deal with a company up in Toronto, Canada, called Octopix Live. Well, they were distributing our content, and we would look at our analytics of our site and see that we were in, or we had X views from, so I think one was Italy. I don't remember all the countries. And I would call and leave a voicemail. Hey, you know, this is Matt, TCW. Are we on in Italy? Wherever. Well, they wouldn't call me back. And then 3 days later, I'd magically have a check in the mail. So that's kind of how that process went. But it was income that we wouldn't have otherwise. But anyway, long story short on that, from my understanding, that was the company, and those contacts led to the deal that Major League Wrestling has with their station and that deal. And I always think back, if we had not, and you know how it is, Hannibal, they say if you want to become a millionaire in wrestling, start as a billionaire. And we just reached a point,
Yeah,
you know,
JJ Dillon said that many times.
so we just reached a point where, you know, we didn't have the money to keep going, even though we had it, you know, we had it really budgeted down. I remember showing Jerry Jarrett the numbers, and he was just like, "You're doing this for that?" And I said, "Yeah, that's what we're doing." But anyway, you know, we had it down. But I always think back to say, you know, if we had hung on another, if we'd had an investor or so forth and could have hung on another 6 months, maybe you would have seen TCW on that channel as opposed to Major League. But it all works out. All things happen for a reason. It led me to where I'm at. I'm happy. I'm Hannibal. I'm sure I'm like you. You know, my trap up into my neck, I go once a week for deep tissue with that. That was from, you know, some bad bumps and so forth back in the wrestling business. But you know, for me, I was 38 or 39, Hannibal. I was wrestling in Tennessee, and we did a spot where the guy was doing, I called it a tilt the world head scissors. You know, guys call different things. We did that. And man, I just didn't get over, and I landed on the back of my neck, and I heard some stuff crack, and we got through the match. And I was like, man, I think I'm about wrapped up here. You know, my legs won't jump when my brain tells them to, like they could. And everybody's different. You know, like God knows Flair wrestled. He was in his early 50s having that big run in WWE that he had, and, you know, going like a
The
champ.
money, I'm sure, helped make him do it, though, too. When you're getting paid a lot, it can make the risk more worthwhile.
Sure. But, you know, I appreciate you having me on. I'm on Facebook. You just look up Matt Duffield. That's my shoot name, Matt Duffield, Duffield. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. It's Matt Duffield AR on Instagram. And then my website is mattduffield.com. And I tried to make it our website, I wanted it to be a little bit flashier than the normal political site because, Hannibal, in the world of politics, there's not a lot of entertainers in it. There's like I said, myself, and of course, Glenn Jacobs over in Knoxville's the mayor, where I think close to a couple 100,000 people, and my buddy Bruno Lauer down in Mississippi. And so, when you get in this and, you're an entertainer, you want some of those aspects in. I think that's what a lot of the voters want. Yeah, you see there, we tried to make it
another pretty boy picture. Hey, you're the lover boy. Give us a tip, a pickup artist tip for any of the single men out there watching.
Well, the number one thing I'll say a couple things. One is be yourself, 100% be yourself. Because if you're not yourself, one thing women have, I think all females have, is they have a BS detector. And if you're not being yourself, man, they know, and it's just going to be downhill from there. I'd say that. And I'd say, man, keep your head up, keep your eyes forward. If you get rejected, one time, just remember, a guy told me one time, this was before I was in politics. He said, man, that's one vote. That's one vote. No. Don't let it get you down. Just keep going. It's try not to take it personal. Nobody likes rejection, Hannibal, and I'm sure you've been in the gym like a few times, and you see a guy approach a girl, and it's not going to go well.
Oh God, yeah. You know what I mean? You feel for the guy.
Yeah, and I was on a preacher curl once, and I remember I just buried my head on. I just wanted to go save him, like waist lock him and say, no, don't do it, man. Like, this is not, but no, man, just be yourself and keep your head up. And I'm a firm believer, if you're who you are, the right people, not just in, women you choose to date or so forth, but just the right people come into your life. If you're yourself, just be your true self, and the right things seem to happen.
Very good advice, and I know you got a lot more stories, so I'd love to have you back. I appreciate you coming on, and I'll let you wrap this up with whatever you want to tell the fans.
Well, Hannibal, I guess, I had a few slogans back in the wrestling days. If you'd like to hear a few, I had.
Oh, one more question. Who had the better theme, Rick Rude in WWE or WCW? Because I loved his WCW theme.
The WCW Slam Jam theme.
Yeah.
With the edited, this is what a Mark Matt is or was or whatever, right? The Slam Jam theme with the edited intro that's not elongated. How's that for what a guy was with Rick Rude? But no, man, that Slam Jam theme. What was the line? He'll break your heart, take your girl, and leave you a fool. He's a ravishing man. He's ravishing rude, or something like that.
Yeah, I missed those themes.
No, I do too, man. No, I miss so much of what the business was. And by the way, Jim Johnson, the guy that did all those themes, that's another Arkansan. You may not have known that. He's an Arkansas guy too. So there's another. I tell you, Arkansas is full of surprises.
There is an interview with him on this channel that John Paz did, just to shout out that. But that I had no idea. That's cool.
Yeah, he's from Arkansas. And if you happen to have a contact on him, Hannibal, I've tried to get one because I'd love to honor him.
I'll track it down for you, sir.
That'd be awesome. But man, again, I appreciate all the work you've done. I appreciate the blood, sweat, and tears you had in wrestling. I watched your documentaries, your journey, and man, it's timing's everything, and some things happen and take us away from what our dream was. But there's no doubt, man, you gave it 100%. And like I said, I don't just say this to everybody, man. I like to think I know what a good worker was or is, and man, you had it, and I know a lot of people shared that opinion, but now, it's led you to this. And dude, I'll tell you, man, I'm not going to lie to you, man. When I would get stressed out down at the Capitol at night, and I'd want to relax. There was a lot of times I'd pull up Hannibal TV. I actually just listened to your Sam Houston interview that was on here, and he told the story about the rattlesnake with Terry Funk and Harley Race and all. Man, it was it was great stuff. Terry Funk. This is just my opinion. Who's the greatest worker of all time? Number one on Matt's list is the great Terry Funk. I mean, he was the guy. Here I am going on again. I'm talking Hannibal. We could talk wrestling. Man, I could talk wrestling all day long with you.
And I'll just throw it up there for a rattlesnake rib that Ron Fuller told me from the Knoxville territory. They used to like sew live rattlesnakes' mouths shut. Now we won't tell the PETA people about this, but then they'd like throw it in a car so the rattlesnake would like wake up in the middle of a road trip and people would freak out. Just the stories from back then are just crazy. We just sewed the rattlesnake's mouth shut. It was perfectly safe.
And those
But
ribs back then, Hannibal, and I play a few ribs on my colleagues in the House of Representatives every now and then. And I have to really be careful. I'm like, man, don't push these ribs too far. This is not the wrestling business. You know what I mean? Because, we had some hellacious ribs. I did bring one of my robes down to the Capitol one day because people were really getting stressed out. And I said, man, we need to break the tension. And so, I had way, way too many wrestling robes for the career I had. But I actually met a woman named Karen McDaniel, who was Wahoo McDaniel's widow, who I'd found out made a lot of Ric Flair's robes. I always thought it was Olivia Walker made them. Well, Karen McDaniel made a lot too. So I ran into her at this convention. I said, hey, could you make me one of those robes? She said, sure. So that led to her making me several robes. So one day at the Capitol, I showed up with one of my robes on. So we still bring it in. A lot of pro wrestling, like I said, it's in the DNA of Arkansas. Most politicians here have an appreciation for what pro wrestling was and were fans. And, Mid-South wrestling was most of the state, but you get into the East part, it was Memphis, it was Lawler, Valiant. That's who those guys talk about. And then the rest, of course, it was, man, JYD, DiBiase, and they all know who Cowboy Bill Watts was, So I'm thankful there's an appreciation for what I did,
Amazing. Well, close us off with a wrestling style promo.
Oh, man. Well, Hannibal, I'll say this. It's been a good 60 minutes, but it's not going to be near as good as the 60 minutes that a young lady's going to have tonight, or actually an older lady. Matt Riviera has been known to like the older ladies too. You got to appreciate them as well. And I'll say this, when the night is done and the dust settles, well, hopefully it's not too much dust, they're going to know one thing, that once you go Matt, you never